Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for coming. We're here to announce for the first time the unsealing and arraignment on an indictment charging a 14-year-old juvenile offender with a number of violent crimes, including sex offenses. This is a case that is both shocking and extremely disturbing, given both the age of the defendant at the time of the offense, as well as the nature of the underlying facts which involve the indictment. Those facts are as follows. On April 19th at about 3:15 in the afternoon, the defendant and an unapprehended accomplice broke into a home in Mastic Beach. At home at the time of the break-in was the 22-year-old victim as well as her 4-year-old daughter. The victim heard noises downstairs, but she assumed it was her husband who had come home early from work. At the time, she was upstairs in her locked bedroom with her 4-year-old daughter. Moments after hearing the noise, the locked door of her room was broken open, and the defendant and the unapprehended accomplice entered the room. Both the accomplice and the defendant were wearing masks at the time, and they confronted the 22-year-old victim and her 4-year-old daughter. The defendant demanded cash from the victim, and the accomplice began walking around the rest of the house looking for items to steal. While the defendant was alone in the room with the victim and her daughter, the defendant, who was armed with a knife, began to rape the victim in front of her daughter. At a certain point in time, the defendant then dragged the victim into the hallway, where he continued to rape and sexually abuse the victim. After he was done assaulting and raping the victim in the hallway, he dragged her back into the room where the terrified 4-year-old daughter was hiding. He then attempted to grab the 4-year-old daughter and bring her out, but the victim from the 4-year-old's mother would not allow that, and she began to struggle with him. The defendant's attention was drawn to the victim. He then took the victim and removed her to a separate room. He had the victim fall to her knees. He then took the knife and slashed her on the left side of her head from her eyebrows back through the hairline. He then took that same knife and stabbed her once in the left upper chest. He then left with the accomplice after stealing a couple of items. Once that occurred, the police were called, and the victim, the 22-year-old victim, was treated at Long Island Community Hospital. A sexual assault examination was performed. At the time, the victim required staples and stitches for injuries to her face, her head, as well as her chest. The scene was processed by members of the Suffolk County Police Department. Evidence was obtained. 2 days later, on April 21st, the defendant was arrested on unrelated charges. He was interviewed in the presence of an adult family member, and while he admitted to the burglary, he denied having anything to do with the sexual assault charges. At that time, he was charged with burglary in the first degree. Notably, the police were able to take a buccal swab from the defendant and obtain a DNA profile. 6 days after that, on April 27th, the Suffolk County Crime Lab issued a laboratory report in which the laboratory report indicated that the DNA profile obtained from the defendant on the 21st was obtained from the DNA profile obtained from the victim at the time of the crime, and the DNA from the victim matched with the defendant. So he was the perpetrator of the sexual assault. That same day, on April 27th, my office took the case, put it into the grand jury, and the grand jury issued a true bill of indictment for the following 9 charges. 1 count each of rape in the first degree and criminal sexual act in the first degree, 2 counts each of assault in the first degree, as well as 2 counts of burglary in the first degree, a count of sex abuse in the first degree, as well as a count of strangulation in the second degree. Those 8 counts refer to the acts committed against the 22-year-old victim. In a 9th charge, endangering the welfare of a child, was filed against the defendant pertaining to the 4-year-old victim. On today's date, the defendant was arraigned and remanded without bail. The top 6 counts of the indictment are all B, violent felony offenders, and as such, the defendant is looking at a sentence of imprisonment of between 3 1/3 to 10 years on each of those charges. Under the amended law, those charges could run consecutive, but the maximum time of incarceration this defendant is facing is 5 to 10 years indeterminate sentence. So those are the facts of the case. Before I turn it over to Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, I just want to thank a couple of people in the room who made not only this case possible, but its swift, not resolution, but its swift conclusion in the grand jury possible. First and foremost, I want to thank Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison. This incident happened on the 19th. There was an arrest on the 21st. The indictment is done with DNA analysis on the 27th. That only happens if you have cooperation and communication with all of our law enforcement partners. And that is what the commissioner promised when he became commissioner. That is what he's delivered. And I want to thank him. I want to thank the commissioner for his continued assistance in not only this case, but all the very many cases that we're working with together. I also specifically want to thank the Special Victims Unit of the Suffolk County Police Department, Commanding Officer Dylan Friedlander, as well as Detective Sergeant James Bayry, as well as Detectives Lauren Ventura, Patrick Boyles, as well as a number of other members of the Suffolk County Police Department. But suffice to say, they work day and night to ensure the swift grand jury conclusion in this case. Obviously, the case continues. I also want to thank the Suffolk County Crime Lab, the Director Dan Dollar, the DNA Supervisor Diane Skodich, and the particular analyst Carrie Nito. Again, they got that DNA profile on the 21st. On the 27th, they gave us a result. That's tremendous work. I know they worked through the night, and I want to thank them for their commitment to this case. Finally, I want to thank my own assistants, my own team, led by Executive Assistant Jim Shalafo, Major Crime Bureau Chief Kerry Ann Kelly, as well as ADA Dina Rosopoulos. Again, these were just 3 individuals who worked day and night in this case to make sure that we got the result that we have now. The other person I want to thank is our victim's advocate, Araceli Buchanan. You can imagine, in the abbreviated time in which you have to present to these cases, this is a difficult case, especially for the victims in this case. So it's important that we have dedicated advocates to help ferry them through the system, and I want to thank the advocates in my office for doing that as well. I'll answer some questions, but first I want to just turn it over to Commissioner Harrison, who has a few words as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray, for once again our partnership, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When I first became the Police Commissioner of Suffolk County, one of the things I wanted to take a closer look at is how do we investigate sex crimes. And currently, Special Victims handles only child abuse crimes as well as child sex crimes. And adult rape cases go to our general service squads. But once I was informed about this heinous act, I wanted to make sure that I have the best investigators handling this case, and that was under the leadership of Dylan Friedlander, Detective Lieutenant, Dylan Friedlander and his team for the great work and making sure that the investigation was thorough and I was able to apprehend our perpetrator in a timely manner. So these were the investigative steps that got us to where we are today. The first thing that we did was provided enough amount of manpower to investigate this crime, making sure that we were able to recover all the evidence, make sure that we were able to cultivate witnesses, make sure that we were able to collect video of our possible suspects. The deployment strategy was a 24-hour-a-day relentless pursuit to assist in the investigation. Second steps was to get the video out to the residents, where we received numerous calls to our detective squads as well as to our Crime Stoppers hotline. This helped us lead to identifying our perpetrator in a timely manner. The third step was to put together a warrants team. This warrants team, under the leadership or our lead investigator, Detective O'Hagan, we were able to apprehend our perpetrator within 24 hours. And that was great work with no incident. This apprehension occurred on Montauk Highway in East Patchogue, the East Patchogue area. Once again, I want to thank Ray Tierney and all the men and women of the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. I want to thank the dental hall from the medical examiner's office for expeditiously getting the DNA evidence back to the investigators so we can charge the individual involved. And last but not least, I want to identify a couple of investigators that were very instrumental in making an arrest. Sergeant Serrata, Sergeant Bibry, Detective Ventura, and Detective Boyle. Echo those same individuals for the great work in making an arrest in this case. I'll pass it